many others not listed.
This is the Caribbean. It is home to 44,763,966 diverse and capable people,
As shown by the live update of the Worldometer at the end of 2023. It has given birth to great thinkers, creatives, intellectuals, and writers like Norman Manley, Kwame Nkrumah, sorry for the pronunciation, Claude McKay, Edward Wilmot Blyden, Dr. Robert Love, Sir A. Francis Williams of Jamaica, and Marcus Garvey, just to name a few. As the website Caribbean Beat would have it, we would also think of many others not listed. The title of intellectuals, thinkers, writers, and creatives was given to these men not simply as a position of unearned status, but as a badge of honor, which shows that they were equipped to think about, strategize, and implement with a degree of success solutions to the global problems that affected them regionally and locally at the time. Watch Derek Walcott discuss Port of Spain's cultural melting pot, an idea that transforms the old world into the new world we are transitioning into. Something we wrestle with today, and we call it pluralism.
You talk, I think, of something I read in a review of one of your books of poetry where someone said that miscegenation, mixture of things, is the key to the modern world. Mixed descent, mixed race, mixed English. Do you think that's an apt description?
Yes, because in one city of Port of Spain, which is a cliche, but every culture, every continent of the world is represented in that one city. And not just as a sort of detritus of slavery or indenture, actively represented by the Hindu religion, by Muslim religion, by Chinese, Indian, Syrian, Lebanese, white, black. It's all there in a very small area of one of the capital places in the Caribbean. The day-to-day experience of that has become so habitual that nobody makes distinctions about saying, oh, this is Chinese, oh. So there's no concept of miscegenation. There's a concept of rather a whole, people can look at it as a bastardization. Some people can look and say, oh, well, Africa has lost its dignity because it's all mixed up with China, and China has lost its identity. But what is the identity? The identity is in the very ferment and crisscrossing of those various cultures within one very compact city.
This man was well ahead of his time. As we listen to the points and explanations about the topic the interviewer pressed him on, it was important to understand that he was speaking of a time to come and the new model that will make it possible. As we look around in our world today, his analysis appears to be flawless. Historically, we have had great thinkers in the Caribbean. We understand fundamentally that the world's systems are more connected now than ever before. That was made objectively clear during the pandemic. What I really wish to discuss here on this channel are the ideas that rule the global order of our time and their historical basis. You might be wondering why it is important to understand these ideas. I would say because ideas are powerful things. Listen to Myles Munroe explain the power of ideas.
He said, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. First of all, keys are precepts. A precept is a thought. Everybody say thought. But precept means original thought. Matter of fact, the word sept means thought or idea. Precept means the idea before the idea. It's kind of a weird concept. It means the original thought that created the thought. That's why a precept is before a concept. A concept is a thought conceived. A precept is the sperm. I went too fast. Okay. Ideas don't always stay in your mind. They're like sperms. But once they lodge and conceive, they become a thought. If you leave them there, they begin to incubate and become a concept. And if you ever decide to bring them to full term, they become a belief. And according to your belief, you become.
We need to be very careful about the ideas we allow to guide our beliefs. Even the Bible warned us of this in Ephesians 6:12 when it said, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." This is basically speaking about ideas. In this video, we are going to wrestle with the idea of communism as one of the ideas of the new globalized order that we see unfolding before our eyes. We are seeking to answer the questions of which political idea will lead the global order, and how much must humanity sacrifice to achieve ideas created by the thoughts of man. Is it the collectivism, state ownership idea of communism? Let us investigate. We shall define this concept using the words of its strongest proponents in order to fully comprehend it. One of them is Friedrich Engels, who was a German philosopher, political theorist, historian, journalist, and a revolutionary socialist. As documented by Encyclopedia Britannica, he was also a businessman and Karl Marx's closest friend and collaborator. He wrote a book, The Principles of Communism. In this book, he outlines very clearly that communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. What is the proletariat, you might ask? He also explained that the proletariat is that class which lives entirely from the sale of its labor and does not draw profit from any kind of capital, whose will and woe, whose life and death, whose sole existence depends on the demand for labor, hence on the changing state of business, on the vagaries of unbridled competition. In a word, the proletariat is the working class of the 19th century. It is important to note that he also co-authored the book The Communist Manifesto with his close friend Karl Marx. And in this book, they outlined that the history of all headed to existing society is the history of class struggle. From freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a word, oppressor versus oppressed. The idea got traction because they worked on the psyches of individuals at the time who legitimately felt that, as the working class, they needed to own or have shares in production. So this idea was implemented in many countries and states with very poor results.
This is the communist vision. Karl Marx lays out that when capitalism is overthrown, there's a transitional period where most lands are transferred to the state. There's still an income disparity, but that disparity goes to the government in the form of massive taxes, where it will then be doled out to help reduce income inequality. Credit, communication, and transport will be centralized by the state, which is designed to mean individual enterprises won't have a chance to steer the economy as big banks and big cell phone monopolies do today. Abolition of the right of inheritance means that when you die, you can't pass along everything you own to your kin. This helps to make it so everyone is born with equal chance of opportunity, and it's also healthier to have the wealth be redistributed after someone's death than during their life. There are many forms of communism: Leninism, Maoism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, but they are all variations of Marxism as explained in the Communist Manifesto.
All these variations were developed and implemented, but all failed at different points. The furthest humanity have gotten with this idea is to the point when government got all the power, making one man in charge, and his human love for power made him keep all the power to himself. Some examples of this are Stalin in Russia, Pol Pot in Cambodia, Mao Zedong in China, and many others, just to name a few. Because of all these failed attempts, the communist philosophers created a sleight of hand. They rebrand communism as neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism. This is why we hear about the culture wars happening now in the West. which gives rise to identity politics, where the oppressor is now fundamental human truths that we express in culture. For instance, the differences between men and women. This distorted concept of feminism was developed on the false assumption that the only relationships between men and women are patriarchal and oppressive. Black Lives Matter claim that white people oppress all black people and LGBT are oppressed by straight men. What they are trying to say is that all your failures and lack of discipline should be blamed on something or another race. This idea is the rebranding of Marxism to cultural Marxism, or what they call in the intellectual circles postmodernism. What this means is that they keep the oppressor and oppressed narrative and applying them to our group identities. Jordan B. Cooper, a professor of systematic theology, explains cultural Marxism as a sleight of hand of Marxism.
But what's really important about this whole movement and how it affects us today is this: that with critical theory, the ideas of Karl Marx were developed and expanded to relate to all different areas of thought. Now, while Marx thought that all different social relations were essentially and foundationally based upon economics, critical theory began applying this narrative of an oppressed group and an oppressor group and applying it to various aspects of social life. And the oppressor was no longer seen as just the rich or the bourgeois who controlled the means of production, but it was expanded to speak about issues of race, class, and gender. Classically, those are the three that are used the most, though there are many other categories that can be discussed in this way as well. And so here now are some of the problems with this Marxist theory. First, it is problematic when people are treated first and foremost by whatever particular group that they are a part of, rather than as the individuals that they are. Now, certainly we have an identity in our groups and communities as well as we do individually, but these group identities do not define absolutely everything about us. And this leads to the second problem, which is that a lot of these groupings are really arbitrary. Why is it, for example, that every white person is classified in a particular group because of race, when those white people may be of extremely different economic statuses, from very different parts of the world, and have completely different life experiences, when there's really nothing that unites them at all other than the fact that they have the same skin color? It's too simplistic to identify and lump people into groups in this way. And there are so many aspects of reality that determine what one's privilege is, and that doesn't just have to do with whether it might be a skin color or gender or race.
The idea that you are oppressed because of your individual deficiencies that you have control over to some degree, like being disciplined, making the right choices, and making the necessary sacrifices, builds resentment for people who make the right decisions in their life and see the fruits of their labor. To be objective, it is necessary to indicate that all human systems are flawed, and there will be difficulties in each. However, the spirit of Cain drives communism, the one who killed his productive brother because of his own deficiencies. The victim mentality gives rise to the idea's attraction. This is why it is so powerful. Every living human being at some point in their life was a victim of something. The rivaling idea of communism is capitalism, which is simply an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Since the Caribbean was once a slave region, we are more drawn to ideologies that derive from the oppressed ideas of communism. The slave owners were indeed capitalists because they bought and sold us as commodities. In that light, we can see communism as a solution to the problem of unregulated capitalism. One of the major proponents of communism, Vladimir Lenin, wrote a book justifying the need to do away with the capitalist ethos and all that comes with it, which in some degree is democracy. He was a politician, a statesman, the founder of the Soviet Socialist State, and one of the leaders of the international communist movement. In this book, he criticizes capitalism by pointing out that the enormous growth of the industry and remarkably rapid process of concentration of production in ever larger enterprise represents one of the most characteristic features of capitalism. That was written on page 16. What this means is that uncontrolled capitalism can create inequality and class problems because the people who own the capital and the means of production will control the market, rigging the social order to benefit them. I agree that this is a problem. What I disagree with is the solution, which is communism, which aims to deliver a classless society controlled by big centralized governments.
One of the key principles of communism is the concept of a classless society. This led to a concerted effort by communist governments to eliminate anything that might be representative of class warfare or create class envy. For example, clothing in communist nations was relatively bland and uniformed, and most cars were of the same make. More importantly, the salaries of employees, regardless of the job performed, were all regulated so that each person would earn approximately the same amount of money. The eventual goal of this classless society would be a state in which there was no currency at all, and the government provided food, clothing, and shelter to citizens in equal amounts. In a true communist nation, there is to be no private ownership of property. All property and businesses are owned by the national government. Therefore, all workers are employed by the government. This would also mean that the state controlled all means of producing goods and services, thus allowing the government to control the distribution of those products.
This agenda is well on the way. To create a classless system, you must own nothing and be happy, which is the dark side of creating a world with no inequality. How are we going to equalize talent, intelligence, skills, and creative work?
And world leaders to get together and scheme up new ways to march us towards a more globalized world. Ideas like NAFTA were born in Davos at their annual meeting. Now, the Great Reset is the name of one of those meetings, and it's since turned into an entire agenda with its own microsite attached to the main World Economic Forum website. And the founder of the World Economic Forum has even written a book titled The Great Reset. So it's very real. Now, the idea is the COVID pandemic has been so disruptive, it's exposed social, political, and economic weaknesses in the Western world. They claim COVID exposed breakdowns in a variety of sectors, from healthcare to education to finance to energy. They claim Western capitalism is the root cause of these issues, and a serious overhaul, a reset of the system is needed. Never mind the fact that most of the disruption was actually caused by governments shutting down businesses, societies, and schools, and now going a step further and telling people they must be vaccinated numerous times over in order to participate in the economy and society. Governments, no matter what their intentions have been, whether you think it's good or bad, they are the reason for the disruptions. But the Great Reset says either way, it's an opportunity to rebuild society in a way the global elites see best fit. Now, one thing that really stands out is that they're very vague about what this reset means or even looks like. They just insist it will be good for us. And because the reset blatantly blames Western capitalism, we see a lot of right-wing outlets such as Fox News and Breitbart going after the Great Reset, claiming it's ushering in socialism or communism. But as Glenn Beck mentioned later on in his interview with Tucker, he says he was wrong, that it wasn't about socialism or communism, that it's more about enacting a form of government similar to China's. And what does that mean exactly if it doesn't mean communism? Well, it means that you would own nothing. Everything would be owned by, most likely, one of the many World Economic Forum partner corporations, and you would have no privacy. Take a look at this video published in 2016 on the World Economic Forum's Facebook page. That you'll own nothing and you will be happy.
Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, authored a book during the pandemic that outlines this very clearly. In this book, he states that there will be an economic reset, a societal reset, a geopolitical reset, environmental reset, technological reset. And he also says that all this will be guided and instructed by the return of big governments. On their website of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, it is well documented that on January 24, 2014, Foreign Minister Wang Yi met in Davos with Karl Schwarz, chairman of the World Economic Forum. In that meeting, they hope that the World Economic Forum in Davos will always keep attention on and support the processes of China's reform and present a true China to the world through the forum. Didn't you hear that? China wants to present a true China to the world through the World Economic Forum. So basically, the World Economic Forum works and supports the aims of the Chinese Communist Party to the world. So COVID-19 coincidentally started in China and brought with it communist laws all over the world. Listen to how China has been using the Belt and Road Initiative to expand its power in the world and in the Caribbean.
There's a new highway in Pakistan and a new rail terminal in Kazakhstan. A seaport in Sri Lanka recently opened, as well as this bridge in rural Laos. What's interesting is that they're all part of one country's project that spans 3 continents and touches over 60% of the world's population. If you connect the dots, it's not hard to see which country that is. This is China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious infrastructure project in modern history that's designed to reroute global trade. And it's how China plans to become the world's next superpower.
Kazakhstan.
It's 2013, and Chinese President Xi Jinping is giving a speech in Kazakhstan, where he mentions the ancient Silk Road, a network of trade routes that spread goods, ideas, and culture across Europe, the Middle East, and China as far back as 200 BC. He then says,
"We should take an innovative approach and jointly build an economic belt along the Silk Road."
A month later, Xi is in Indonesia.
The two sides should work together to build up a new maritime route in the 21st century.
These two phrases were the first mentions of Xi's legacy project, the multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. They're also the two components of the plan. There's an overland economic belt of 6 corridors that serve as new routes to get goods in and out of China.
Boston University Global Development Policy Center has published on their website that China's DFI lending to Latin America and the Caribbean from 2005 to 2022 totaled $146 billion, with most directed towards Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Being aware of China's plans for the Caribbean and the rest of the world makes you have a better appreciation for these figures.
Step onto a Jamaican construction site and you might wonder, what's with all the Chinese workers? These boots on the ground, part of China's foray into the Caribbean, bringing with it Chinese loans, but also friction. These are the beginnings of a much-needed children's hospital, a gift from China, but one with strings attached. It's their contractor, up to 50% their workers, leaving many in the local industry cut out. At sites across Jamaica, it's often like that, except it's usually alone, a big one.
So they're doing a number of buildings looking very similar to that one.
That has engineer Carvel Stewart speaking out.
You're saying China essentially loaned money to itself to do work in another country?
Well, that's what it did, because it lends you the money, and on the bottom of it, it says the beneficiary is China Harbor Engineering Company.
The people who build the roads and do the projects.
The people who build the road and do the project.
While the infrastructure is needed, the added debt, he says, is not, especially if China's investment doesn't improve the economy in the long run.
We will be seeking funds to repay those loans later on without having had the opportunity for the economy to earn from those funds.
To understand who wins and who loses, we're hitting the road. Jamaica borrowed $700 million to have a Chinese state-owned firm build this toll highway. 1,000 Chinese were imported to do the work alongside Jamaicans. It's also the first pillar we see of China's strategic plan, an outlet for their labor. And it's hard for Jamaica to say no to China. A country full of dilapidated roads and a government too broke to fix them all. So locals hustle to collect money to pay for cement and do the work themselves.
So in short, as you heard, the leader of a communist party that seeks global dominance is giving the Caribbean countries loans that we have to pay back fully, and they send 50% of their workers to work. This means 50% of the money is going back to China via its construction firms. To give you a bit of perspective, listen to the thinking of a senior statesman defending this situation.
To put it in perspective, we're heading to meet one of Jamaica's most senior statesmen.
Ambassador.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good. Thank you
Pleasure.
very much. Very good to meet you. We'll get you right
Richard Bernal was Jamaica's ambassador to Washington, now runs a global center at its main university.
I know there are cases in other developing countries where they bring in a lot of their own workers. But in this case, the numbers are relatively small and they have been reducing over time.
He dismisses concerns over who's doing the work when you consider what Jamaica is getting with the loans.
One, the terms are quite generous, long repayment periods, low interest. Secondly, the Chinese are very competitive in carrying out these construction projects. And thirdly, what you find is that it comes with less conditionality than Western aid.
To put it in perspective,
To really put it into perspective, understand that China is a communist dictatorship that wants to extend their power through economics and ideology, and they loan the Caribbean countries more money than they can pay back with no conditionalities. Listen to how people in the Caribbean have already caught onto this and are trying to fight back against it, while the majority is completely blind about all of this.
but in return for its money, China is looking for influence and opportunity, and that is all about location.
So this is Little Goat Island?
Yes, it is.
Goat Island sits directly north of the strategically critical Panama Canal.
Yes.
And this is where the Jamaican government agreed to allow the Chinese to build a huge port.
This is where they want to build a port.
But when Ingrid Parchment heard about it, she knew it had to be stopped.
I thought, why are we giving away one of our major resources to somebody because they have an idea?
Are we paying attention as a region and focusing on our best interests? Do we have a choice in the matter? And why not have a choice in the matter? Isn't it our region is big enough with enough resources to sustain us so that we can have our own sovereignty, our freedom for us to create our own story, and not have to borrow money with or without conditionality? Because a lack of conditionality without a proper payback strategy is itself a conditionality. Wake up, my people.